the past 3 days, we've been learning SQL and writing SQL queries, running the queries within our Postgres database. But there's got to be kind of like an easier way. Writing all those long queries is kind of, I don't know, it's a lot of writing stuff in SQL specifically. Is there like another way we can do this? And we've been learning Python. Like, why can't we just use Python? There's got to be a way. And there is a way. It's called Scicab PG. It's a library that enables you to essentially access your Postgres database and execute commands within the database, such as creating tables, modifying tables, just any SQL query that you write out the past 3 days, you can interpret that into like a string and then run that string and using Scicab PG, and it will execute those queries. So all the information that I'm going to go over for like the next 40 minutes is in today's write-up, but we're going to go through some examples. So I just created a new directory called Scicab PG for today's lecture. I'm going to cd into it. Okay. So I'm just going to kind of follow along initially. So Scicab PG, what is this? Here it is. It's a Postgres adapter for the Python programming language. So this enables you to write code and connect to your Postgres database and write Python code, execute SQL queries with Python. But first, I'm going to install it. Pip install Python. I've already have it installed. Okay. I'm going to create a Python file called class roster. Python, oh, nope, touch class roster.py. My code class roster. Okay. So first thing I need to do is import the PG 2. Yep. Okay. Let's go look at this documentation. Installation, let's look at the basic model. So all this is in the documentation. I can't emphasize this enough, is 80% of the time you're going to be reading documentation to figure things out. So, and 20% of the time you're actually coding. For example, at my last job, I had to, I was doing a front end. I was literally just creating a select drop down, and I had to conform to our designer's specific design. And so I had to research what libraries can I use to manipulate the default select drop down, because they have like internal. And it took me like 4 to 6 hours to get to a point where I had something that was similar to our design. And then I was like, you know, this is probably, I don't know if we can actually replicate your design. Like, I just don't think that's technically possible. She's like, okay, we can make some like design sacrifices. I mean, it still looks good. It just doesn't conform. I'm like, I just still wasn't satisfied with that. So the next day, for like another 2 or 3 hours, I just was reading documentation that entire time. So this is literally what was reading the entire time. All this stuff. This is just like front end. Then I was going into an advanced stuff. Anyway, but I can't emphasize that we have to get used to reading documentation. If it's like, I just don't know how to do it, that's not good enough. You're gonna have to read documentation, read how things work. That's the only way you'll learn, and then also by actually implementing that stuff. So can't emphasize reading documentation. Back to Scicab PG 2. So this is like the basic architecture we have. So we import Scicab PG. Now we have to connect to our Postgres database. This is all in Python. So Scicab PG has a connect method that takes in database name and our user equals Postgres. So I'm just going to copy some boilerplate. This is all in the read up today. So connection, I'm assigning it to a variable. This is Python now. I'm assigning this connection method, like the result of this, into a connect method that takes in a string class roster. That's going to be the name of our database, and then also the user of Postgres. What is your username for the Postgres?
Whatever your username is for your computer.
Whatever your username is for your computer. Well, there's an easy way to figure that out. You just type in PSQL and don't include anything. It's right here, TA pre. And I also, it looks like I have to import OS. So this is how you get your username. Let's just actually run username equals, I'm going to run this function right here to see what it returns. I'm going to comment this out, and I'm actually going to run this file. Oh, I got to print it out, don't I? Username. Python. Class roster. Right there. So how I did PSQL, TA pre is the default kind of what your Postgres database's name, and then OS that get login. Yes.
So then, instead of having to import the OS, you could just do like DB name equal to whatever you want to call. But that's essentially your create DB, right? Where it says DB name.
Right here? Yeah, I have to connect to a existing database.
And then user could use like
hard code that in?
Oh, yeah, like just say TA free since you know.
But if this is a scalable application, you don't know what that.
Or in our specific case, you're transferring it to somebody else's computer and they go to run it, it will fail because the other users are going to have like even if you just copy it onto my computer, you just hard code the username, it would fail because I don't have a TA free on my computer. Right?
So yeah, if this was like a production code base, and so you're going to have a copy of the production code base on your laptop. And so you essentially need that code base to operate on any laptop without having to hard code stuff like that in. So os.getLogin will get my username. So first I have to create this class roster. I just check to see if this class roster exists. Does not exist, so I'm going to create DB class roster. All right, I'm going to PSQL into the class roster. Looks like it exists. I'm going to check no relations. Cool. Let's go back to the documentation. So connect to an existing database. Right here, we got connection, open a cursor to perform database operations. Okay, I guess I need a cursor. So to perform database operations, undo, comment this. I need that. I need a connection for a cursor. And now I'm connected to now I can like execute commands. So I assign cursor variable to connection.cursor. Let's go back to the database. Let's just look at, whoops. What cursor is. Connection encapsulates a database session and allows to create a new cursor instance using the cursor method to execute database commands and queries. Terminate transaction uses methods commit and rollback. Okay. we'll get to that later. Oh, yep.
What actual cursor?
Allows it. So, yep, cursor allows to send commands to the database using methods such as execute and execute many. So in here, so look at right here, we have execute a command. This creates a new table, cursor.execute, and it takes in a string of a database query. So this create table test, and we're assigning this is literally just a database query that we've been doing. So it takes it in as a string. So let's go ahead. So it's just.
Is that what's actually taking the string that you're putting into SQL?
The cursor?
Yes, that's what I'm just trying to learn with the cursor.
So the cursor allows you to execute commands. So I'm sorry.
Virtual prompt or terminal?
It like enables you to write SQL queries in Python. Like that cursor is connected. That's what it does. I'm not sure like specifically how it does it underneath the hood. But yeah.
Do we still have to write the schemas for PSQL?
Yes.
Okay.
So I'm going to actually create so I created a class roster of our students. I'm going to create a students table or students table. So this create table, this is just like a normal SQL query. Students takes an ID, serial, a primary key. This is all stuff we've done the past 3 days. A name, and let's do a favorite food. And it's a varchar. And the default varchar, let's do 255. All right. Let's move back to the documentation. Execute a command. So I'm just assigning this to a string. This table, student table creation query. Just assigning it to a string. Now if I want to execute that command, I use the execute and then just that variable name. So I got the cursor dot execute student table creation query. All right, pass data to fill it. We don't have to necessarily do that. We can query the database, make the changes to the database persistent, so it's actually committing. So let's look at what commit does. Methods commit. Sorry. Insert. So it's just executing commands. Execute. Keep going. Oh, there's a lot. Trying to fetch from username. Anyway, but yeah, this makes the changes. Let's do this. And then close the communication with the database. So cursor.close and then connection.close. So I'm just going to copy this as a reference. So I'm going to do connection.commit. So connection is up here. And then I want to close that connection. So cursor.close and connection.close.
What's the connection?
You're committing, you're actually like committing that stuff to the database and like saving it. I'm not quite sure specifically. Execute might, I don't know if it's actually like persisting in the database. It might just be like putting it somewhere before you're actually committing it. So this execute. So if we just did, let's do this without committing it. Oh, well, let's just do this according to the documentation right now. So I'm creating a connection to our database. I'm assigning that connection to a variable. I'm creating a cursor, so I'm able to execute commands in the database. I'm assigning that to a variable. Then I'm assigning a SQL query that we've been doing the past 3 days, and I'm assigning it to a string, or I'm creating a string of a SQL query and assigning it to a variable. Then I'm executing that string, or that query. Then I'm committing it, so it's saving it to the database. Then I'm closing off the cursor. Then I'm closing the connection. So I'm no longer, let's run this. Python class, maybe we might get some errors, I'm not sure. All right, what happens when nothing blows up? It's a good thing, did something. All right, I'm gonna go into class roster. ESQ. Now, let's see what happens. Oh, crap. C takes some time because my laptop's a little slow sometimes. Or it's just going haywire. There we go. So I created a students table. Now let's look at the students table. I've got the name, primary key. Or I've got the ID as the primary key. Got the name, that's the varchar. And I've got a favorite food. Pretty cool. Now let's insert some data in there. But every time you run this, it's going to run that create table. So what command do we, what SQL query do we usually need every time you're creating a, essentially creating a new schema? What do we usually have to do? So yes, we have to drop the table every time you run this. So I just drop student table, drop, and then I actually have to execute it. Cursor, dot execute, drop student table. All right. Now I want to insert some data. So cursor, dot execute. Let's see what execute does. So pass data to fill query placeholders, the correct conversion, no SQL injections. So it looks like it takes in 2 parameters. Here, you can take in insert as well as, I guess, the values. This is the yep. So yep, %s is, it can't use string interpolation, so you can't use like that F. So it has to use, this is like the old school way to do string, to incorporate like the values. So let's copy this and use this as a reference. So cursor, I already have it down here. I'm going to insert into student name's favorite food with the values. So instead of num data, this is the corresponding to these values. So insert into students, the name down here, and the favorite food as these values, just always use this. If you try to use like a number or something, this essentially means it's like a string, but it takes in the values as a tuple. So, Amir, what's your favorite food?
Pizza.
Pizza. All right. Let's do. Herlin, what's your favorite food?
Oh, well, he took mine was pizza, so I guess my second favorite would be lasagna.
I don't know how to spell that.
Lasagna.
Say that again?
I think
Lasagna.
No, you're good.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right.
There you go. Lasagna.
Put me on the spot, man. All right, Ethan, what's your favorite food? What? Sweet. All right, we're executing. So we're inserting this.
It's a spice. It's not a food.
Now let's execute this. Let's run this. All right. Now let's run this Python file. It's class roster. So what we're doing, we're created a connection to our database called class roster. We created a cursor that enables us to execute commands on that database, like query commands. We're dropping the table just in case it exists. We're assigning it to a variable. We're creating that table, as well as the columns and the types. We're executing that query, and now we're executing these queries. We're actually inserting the values into the name and the favorite food into the database. So let's run this. Nothing happened. Why do I keep doing that? PSQL, class, roster, Control D, what is it? Students. Let's see if this worked. Oh, what happened? Oh, I have to actually do a select. Let's do a select star from students. There we go.
So for the modulo S,
That essentially, it's like for the value, it's essentially trying to say like these values correspond, like it's as a string. So no matter how many columns you have, because this name and favorite food represents a column, there should be a corresponding number of %s. And that's literally just the old syntax to import like data instead of string interpolation. Yeah.
Reading through the documentation, two interesting things. One, it specifically calls out using the word never 4 times, and then it says not even at gunpoint to use the string concatenation to put together your thing.
yeah, that's referring to the single and double quotes interpolation, not the formatting one.
Oh, okay.
No, so don't even, so trying to just add your query on as a different part of the string or put your query directly in, it specifically says don't put your values in, you have to do it as a separate tuple.
Okay.
And the other one is for making a tuple, if you only have one item, you still have to put a comma in it and put it into parentheses.
So if I was only putting one, so for example, just for, if I only had one value, or like one column, and I had to put in one value here since it's a tuple, I would still have to add this comma here?
Yes.
Yes. So it says that in the documentation. Where does it say that?
That's actually a feature of Python, how tuples work. But
Okay.
there's an example about halfway down where it has inserting the name for value.
All right.
No apostrophe value.
Ah,
We're inserting that equals the tuple with the comma in there. That makes it a little bit clearer.
right here. So it's got that comma in there. So let's get back to how does everyone feel so far about this? About yep. All right, let's move on. Let's do another example. This time, we're going to do something different. Oh. So what we just did essentially was like a script that executes specific instructions, and it just does it linearly, and it does it once, and it's done. So when I worked in banking, I was a treasury analyst, and when companies would send their ERP, like say they've got payroll to pay, and they get to choose to how to upload their payroll file from the ERP system. We can do it like called direct transmission, or they can just manually drag and drop that file in their online portal with the bank. And there's multiple formats that can be in. And a lot of times it's CSV. And in CSVs, what data type does the CSVs come in? Like the individual columns. They come in as strings. So, but a bank won't take that CSV file that the company uploads of their payroll, and like the data type that comes through is not what aligned with what the bank needs to actually run that payroll file to actually send out disperse, like ACHs to actually pay you. They have to clean that data.
Okay.
So, oh no, go ahead.
Is that that's different than, so you wouldn't use a parser, you would have to use like a translator?
You'd use a script where we're going to build right now. So this is all in your curriculum for today. So here we're going to use some existing data in a CSV file, and we're going to create a script and run that. So we're going to create a database called Sacramento Real Estate, and we're going to import and read from a CSV file, and we're going to clean that data and change the CSV file's data and push it into our database with the correct data types and everything like that. So here is the file. Let's see. I have it. Raw. So I'm going to create. I'm going to remove that. Move. Touch a Sacramento, just a real estate Python file and a Sacramento, I don't know, CSV file. I don't know if I can open. Oh, here we go. Code. So using Scicab PG2, I'm going to so what I'm doing here, importing Scicab PG2 right now. But what I need to do, right now I just need to read from that database. Or read from the CSV file. So what was that file name? Probably spelled wrong. So I'm going to be running a script, and it's going to clean this data and push it into a database with the correct data types instead of just everything as a string. I just want to make sure I'm reading from this CSV file correctly right now. Print row. So I've got the Sacramento real estate CSV. I'm reading from it. This is all should be pretty familiar from you now, with you now. I'm going to run this real estate. Oh no. Ah, thank you. Let's rerun this. Great. Now let's bring in PG. So first I need to do what? I need to create a database that I want to store all that data in. So create DB real estate. Why not? Yes. PSQL real estate. See if anything exists in here yet. There's no relations. Cool. So what am I going to do now? Hold on a second. So again, I need to bring in a connection and connect to the real estate database. I need to create a cursor. Is it is a connection dot cursor? Let's look at the documentation. Yep. And let's see. Need to create a table. Instead of writing all this out, I'm copying and pasting. So let's look at that CSV file. Let's run this one more time. We're gonna have to add all the columns and everything. Yikes. So it looks like we need a street, a city, a zip code, a state column, a beds column, baths, square footage, type, sale date. So the Sacramento real estate has all this stuff. This is what it is. So I need to create a database that mirrors that. And now I need to assign it to a variable that's BigQuery that creates a table. That's what it looks like. So in here, a script, we all know how to write methods at this point. So this method, the table creation query, when this runs, it's just going to return this string. So if I were to execute this table query, it should create that table. Let's see if it does. I'll comment that out for now because we don't need that. And now if I cursor dot execute, because I need to execute that query, I can usually like just copy and paste that whole thing, but I don't want to. I'm going to run this table query. I'll run this method. So I connected to a database. I created a cursor that allows me to execute commands in the database. I created another method called table creation query that returns just a string. So let's just make things easier. It sucks. Yeah. So this is just the ID, the type, street address, bar chart, characters. But look at here, the number of beds is an integer, the number of baths is an integer, the square footage is an integer, the property type, bar chart, and then we got sale date is a timestamp, sale price is an integer, We have latitude and longitude, which are decimal points. So I might have to import something else for decimal.
Decimal is same thing as numeric.
Not to get ahead, but if you were going to actually use this as a function, wouldn't you create the name of the table in the function? That way we're not creating the same table over and over again?
So at that, what we could do is, like we did with the other, is drop the table. Right?
Oh, no, but I'm talking about, like, in this particular one, you're creating the table. Okay, I guess you're not naming the table on this, are you?
The table's right here.
Of properties. So you're creating a properties table with this function. Couldn't you use this function to create other tables as well with the same parameters?
I mean, in theory, you can create a method that accepts parameters of the table name you want, and then do string interpolation and create as many tables as you want.
Right, so just create a general table creation method.
Yeah. Let's run this. Let's see what we get back. Okay, nothing happened. Let's SQL into our database. Control D. Oh no. Why did that happen? Did I follow the documentation correctly? Did I commit it? Let's close it too. Cursor close and connection close. I do that all. Let's run this again. All right, nothing happened. Go into our database. There we go, we got properties. Cool. So now what I'm gonna have to do is clean this data, the data that comes into here. So I'm just going to create a clean data method that's going to take in a row. So I'm just going to copy and paste this. All right, so what's going on in this method? It's a method that we define as clean data. It's going to take in a CSV row. We're going to create a variable and assign it to a dictionary. We're going to create keys corresponding to the street address, the city, zip, state, essentially all of the columns. I'm sorry?
Are you renaming them there when it says CSV row street? That was happening.
I'm not.
It's identifying them with the way they are in the CSV file as street underscore address, and then inserting it. It's gonna insert it into the dictionary as a different.
Oh yes. So yeah. So in here it's street, but we're gonna reassign it to street address. So the columns that we created in the database have to correspond to the clean data keys. So the keys will be essentially the columns. So any questions up to this point?
Do you have to import date and math for this to work?
Might have to. So as we get down to the numbers or the number of beds, so it comes in as a string. The CSV, everything's a string. So we're converting it to an integer right here. And then this is just the type of format we want it to be in for strips. I think it's like stripping the date time. And then also we got decimal. So we actually have to import some more stuff. And then also date time is another. So we're cleaning the data. We're taking all the CSV, the data from the CSV, which is, they're all strings, and we're converting them to the correct type for our database. Questions?
What did you import from decimal date time?
Oh, it's just decimal and date time. So I'm actually gonna move this stuff down here beneath everything. So this is when I'm connecting cursor. I also need I'm just like organizing, connecting to host database. Down here. Now I'm executing, creating database table. Now at what point, so I've got this file. So right when I run this file, it's gonna open the CSV and it's gonna print everything. So how do I just want to return one row. So this is just converting one row into the correct format and data type for a single row in the database. So what if I signed a variable called like clean data equals, I'm going to run this clean data method. I'm going to import the row. Does that make sense? Then I'm going to print clean data. So I'm going to comment this all out. I want to see what the outcome of this is. I'm going to see like the outcome of what the clean data is. Oh yeah, I can't do that. So I'm going to call it something else. I like new data. So let's see. We're not doing anything with SciCobb yet. We're just going to clean the data from the CSV file and putting it into the right data format that we need to eventually import it into our database. So I'm going to exit out of here. I'm going to clear. I'm going to Python real estate. Oh, I love Python. Looks like, all right, let's go up to the top. We got street address. All right, it's a variable, or I'm sorry, it's a string. Zip code, state, number of beds. It's an integer. Sweet. What if we did, I want to see, let's see if this works. Just want to ensure that the type. So what I'm doing here, I'm just grabbing the number of beds of each row. I don't really care about the value. I want to care about the type. We want it to be an integer. We see that it doesn't have parentheses or quotes over it, so we can assume it's a, but I just want to be sure. All right, class, it's an inner int. Awesome. Clear. Now, how do I import this into the database now? I need to execute an insert, right? So within here, let's do it. I need a cursor because so I'm executing a table. I essentially need another execute. But instead of, I need an insert query. This is really long, so bear with me. Very long query. I don't like the clean data. New data. So the execute takes in the query right here. And again, we need the S's, the percent S's. We need a total, essentially the same amount of columns that the database has. And then we're creating a tuple of the values of new data. City. Questions up to this point? This won't work yet. Can anybody tell me why? Why do I have a cursor down here? Or why do I have it? Why is it underlined?
Because you don't recur at that point in the cursor.
Right. So this is a script that's going to run linearly, like top to bottom. So I have to essentially do this. Will this still work? I've already got a database that's created.
You don't have
Did I already? So I have to like delete the table? Is that what you're saying?
if it's, I forget what the topic says, but yes, if we're creating the table here, we can't create it again.
Yep.
We're inserting into the already existing table called properties.
Right, but I think we're still creating the table somewhere up here.
Yeah, up
Maybe
here.
I'm wrong.
Like I can comment this out and it'll work, but let's just comment that out for the time being.
You have to put if exists, if doesn't exist.
So you want to do that? You want to create another method?
I'm saying that's what you would do. Right. You want to, like, comment that out.
So let's run this. So let's just review what's happening. I'm creating a table query or creation query, which returns a string of a query that's creating a table called properties. It's creating all the columns, including the types that we need in those columns. Yeah. And then the clean data takes in a CSV row. Single row, and a row is just, it's going to be in a, it's going to come in as a dictionary.
That's an interesting side question. Can you have your create table return a multi-line string?
A multi-line string?
So make it triple quotes and actually have
Yeah.
lines to it.
Yeah.
So it's actually easier to read instead of just trying to.
So instead of single, we're doing the triple, like something like this.
or however you wanted to break it up.
Yeah.
Made it easier to read.
Yes, I believe you can do that. I think I've seen that before.
You also want to drop the table if it exists before you create the table because it's already been created.
Right. Let's just do that. Cursor, execute. What is it? Drop table.
Drop table if it
Exists.
new table name.
Where's the table? Properties. Cascade. Just. So let's run this and see what happens. Oh. So before, let's keep walking through. So we have a CSV file, comes in as a dictionary, but all the values are strings. And we have to convert those strings into the required type for the database. So all these are fine right here. They're varchar, they're already a string. But once we get down to beds, it comes in as a string, but we have to convert it to an integer. Same with number of baths, square feet. Property type is fine. Comes in as a string, that's okay. Sale date, we'll want to change. Let's look at, I don't even know what this is. Let's see what this is. Strip time, Python.
Maybe that just
I think it reformats it.
like takes the whatever formatting you have on it, strips the
Yeah.
React.
Tutorial points, pretty good one. Except for that massive ad. That's great. So yep, it takes in the string, and then an optional format. This is it parses the string in the correct format that you want. And then this method is clean data. So when you run this file, it's going to open up the CSV file, and we're going to be looping through each row. We're going to call this method, the clean data, pass in the row. It's going to come in here into the clean data. It's going to create these street address keys, all these keys that correspond to the columns that we created up here. Street address, city, zip code, and it equals the CSV role value. And we're converting it into the correct type. And at the very end, it's returning clean, which is just a dictionary. So this is just a dictionary of the clean data. Now we're running that cursor.execute. We're running a SQL query. It takes in two parameters, which is the actual SQL query, this format, street address, city, zip code. The order of this matters, and then values, and then just the total number of columns. The number of S's equal the number of columns. And then we're gonna put all the clean data into a tuple. So we have new data, that street address, new data, that city, and so on. And then we're committing it, we're actually saving it, and then closing the connection and everything. We figured it just nothing happens. And it doesn't change the database either. Or, I guess, yeah, I don't know.
Maybe they just keep running it, like,
Yeah, well, disconnect from the
Close
database.
down the icon.
So we're going to run this script and to clean the data and see what happens. Nothing happened. Is that usually a good thing? So let's go into our database. Control D, or \D, the properties. Okay. So let's run a select star from properties. What's a way to clear that up?
Just looking at the other.
Yeah, it's there's like a way. I forgot how. It's like /x. Oh, there we go. Oh, there's. There we go. Thank you. And then you just keep going. Got 2. Oh, oh. Any questions using /x? Remote, what questions do you have using SciComm in the documentation?
Yeah, so I read ahead a bit. Can you go over getting reading data out of the database?
Yep. Let's see, query the database and obtain data from the Python object. Let's just copy this. I wish I had the other one. I'm going to open up another file. Was it the class roster? So this is how we'd read it. We'd like fetch 1. Let's cursor fetch 1. Is that what it is? Drop table, fetch 1. I'm not sure what's going to happen. We could do I'm going to run cd. Go into that cd lectures. Python class roster. Fetch 1, program error, no result to fetch. Do I even have? Oh, thank you. So that's from test, but we don't want test. We want students. See what? I'm going to rerun this. So in the documentation, you can execute a select all from whatever table, whatever data you want to grab. We're going to fetch 1. Let's see what it actually returns. It might not return anything. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. Am I printing out something? So it doesn't. Let me see. Let's import, was it IPython? Is it import from IPython, import embed? So remember what this does?
Allows you to troubleshoot.
For I've got a cursor. I'm not going to.
think the person that actually returns it is actually
Oh. Ah, crap. So before, I'm going to comment all this stuff out. All right. Cursor, or let's query equals what happened? Oh, so I do cursor dot execute because I'm trying to figure out will return it. There we go. Okay. So in order to see it, this is how I would see it. Is actually when the program is running, we can run the cursor.fetch1 and it'll return the first one. And if I think there's fetch all too. I don't know. But that's how essentially you would be fetching queries. So you're executing the actual select and you're fetching all of them. Yeah. Fetch one, fetch many. So yeah. Empty. I don't know if this is gonna work. Oh, there we go. Fetch all. That's just
Fetch from that. Can't fetch from previous.
yeah, correct. Because I wouldn't worry too much about fetching stuff in the script that you're writing. And this is just a Python file. Where'd that other one go? Oh, I quit out of this. Does anyone remember?
Exit.
I can also do quit and parentheses.
Quit?
Quit with parentheses.
Oh, that's right. So we have no more questions. Let's go over the challenge for today. Here's a documentation, and then Chicago salaries. You're going to grab the Chicago salaries data from a CSV file. It's a public information. You're going to export it, CSV, and then you're going to create your database, Chicago salaries, create columns, and create an annual salary column. And you're going to notice in the CSV file, the CSV file is going to have columns like full-time, part-time, or like salary underscore or underscore hourly. And you're going to have to essentially combine all that data on whether they're salary or hourly, calculate this stuff if they're hourly to determine what their salary, their annual salary is. So hours per week they work, that's like probably another column in the data you're going to grab. And then you're going to have to add all that stuff to an annual salary.
So you get vacation.
They probably just don't get. You're going to clean and insert the data.
A vacation will be paid for though, but it's salary.
And then we have a queries SQL file that you can add to all these queries. Find the employee being paid the most. It doesn't need to be in it's in SQL. So, but yeah, you're gonna have to run a script, create a Python script that connects to the database, your database, creates a connection. This is where you're creating the table of these columns. Make sure the type, like annual salary, probably wants to be an integer. And then you're gonna have to read from the data, read from a CSV file. And then also write a method to accept a row from that CSV file and manipulate that data and put it in the correct data type. I would use what this, it's like essentially like here's your, here's going to be a little, once you get into actual looking at the CSV row, it's going to be a little bit more in depth and a little more manipulation, some more logic that you have to implement. But that was a long lecture.
Love it.
Digging Thursday pairing.
And yes, please pair.
Please pair.